I didn't plan the funeral. My daughter's husband did. At the time, I told myself it made sense. He was organized. He knew people. And I was the one sitting in the corner of the hospital waiting room at 2 a.m, still wearing the sweater I'd had on since Tuesday, unable to remember if I'd eaten. So when my son-in-law stepped in and said he would handle everything, I nodded. I let him. That was my first mistake, not the last. My daughter Renee had been married to him, to Curtis, for 11 years. 11 years of Thanksgivings and Sunday dinners and birthday cards, signed with both their names. I knew him, or I thought I did. He coached Little League for a summer. He remembered how I took my coffee. He called me Mom at the wedding, and I cried, genuinely cried, because I thought, my girl found a good one. My son Warren died on a Saturday in March. He was 43 years old. The hospital called it a cardiac event. Sudden. Unexpected. No prior history of heart disease, they said, though they also said these things can go undetected. I asked questions. The doctor was patient with me. He explained in careful language that sometimes the heart simply stops, that sometimes there's no warning. I went home that night and sat in Warren's old bedroom. I hadn't changed it much, still had his high school track trophies on the shelf, and I thought, something is wrong. Not grief, not shock, something specific and nameless that sat in my chest like a stone. I didn't say anything to Renee. She was devastated. Warren was her brother, her big brother, the one who drove her to prom when her date cancelled, who showed up with tools every time something broke in her apartment before she met Curtis. I wasn't going to add my suspicions to her grief. Not yet. The funeral was on a Thursday. Curtis arranged everything. The flowers, the reception hall, the pastor, it was tasteful. People kept telling me it was beautiful, the service. I smiled and said, thank you. I shook hands. I accepted casseroles. It was 2 days after the burial that I got the call. I didn't recognize the number at first. Atlanta area code, but not one in my contacts. Something made me pick up. Mrs. Holloway, a man's voice. Older, careful as choosing his words before he said them. This is she. My name is Harold. This is she. My name is Harold, out on Decatur Street. A pause. I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, truly. Warren was a good tenant, good man. I thanked him. I'm calling because... Another pause. I found something in the apartment. When I went in to start the process, with his belongings, I think you need to see it. I don't want to describe it over the phone. He cleared his throat. And Mrs. Holloway, I don't think you should bring your son-in-law. I mean no disrespect. There are things in here that I think should stay between us for now. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment after we hung up. The casserole dishes were still stacked on the counter. The sympathy flowers were starting to go brown at the edges. I got in my car. Harold met me at the door. He was a heavy-set man in his late 60s, grey at the temples, wearing a falcon's cap and work boots. He shook my hand with both of his. He looked me in the eye and said, I didn't know who else to call, but I knew I couldn't not call. Warren's apartment was small, a one-bedroom on the second floor of a brick building, ceiling fans, hardwood that needed refinishing. It smelled like him still. Coffee and the cedar soap he always used. I had to stop in the doorway for a second. Harold let me take my time. Then he walked me to the desk in the corner of the living room. On top of it was a laptop still plugged in. Beside the laptop was a manila folder, thick with rubber bands around it. And underneath both of those, half hidden by a legal pad, was a small external hard drive. The kind you can buy at Best Buy for $30, the size of a deck of cards. He came home 2 weeks before he died, Harold said, and he asked me if I had a safe. Said he wanted to store some documents somewhere other than the apartment. Said it like it was nothing, just a practical question. But he was agitated, I noticed. Harold shook his head. I wish I'd asked more. I didn't. I opened the manila folder. The first thing I saw was a spreadsheet printed out. columns of numbers, dates going back almost 3 years. At the top, in Warren's handwriting, Curtis, Rowan Capital account transfers. Warren had been for 17 years, he says, his own small practice, mostly small business clients, a few individuals. One of those individuals for the last 4 years had been Curtis. I sat down in the desk chair. I read, I am not a financial person. Numbers make my eyes cross. But Warren had annotated everything. Notes in the margins in his small, precise handwriting. Transfer to personal account, no business justification. $14,000, March 3. And below that same pattern, February and November before that. He's been doing this for at least 30 months. Curtis was a partner at a mid-size investment firm in Buckhead, Rowan Capital Management. He handled client portfolios, retirement accounts, trust funds, college savings. I knew this in the vague way that you know your son-in-law's job without really understanding it. He wore nice suits. He drove a BMW. I thought that was just how his industry worked. According to Warren's notes, Curtis had been quietly moving money out of client accounts for almost 3 years. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Skimming, Warren had written. Classic skimming. Hard to catch unless you're looking. He knew I'd be looking. That last line, he knew I'd be looking. I turned the page. There was a printout of an email. Warren had sent it to Curtis 4 weeks before he died. I read it twice. Curtis, I need to talk to you about the Meridian account discrepancies I found. I've been putting this together for 2 months. I think you know what I've found. I'm not going to the SEC yet. I'm giving you the chance to make it right. But I need you to sit down with me this weekend. W. Below the email in Warren's handwriting, he said yes. He came over Sunday. He was calm, too calm. The next page was a handwritten note, just a few lines. If something happens to me, look at the Meridian Fund transactions from January through March of this year. Curtis has been embezzling from clients. I have the documentation. The external hard drive has everything. Account numbers, transfer records, his personal account statements. The password is Renee's birthday, reversed. My hands were shaking by then. Harold was standing in the kitchen doorway, not watching me, giving me privacy while staying close. I looked up and he looked back at me, and I said quietly, "Did anyone else come here after Warren died?" Day after the hospital called. Said he was collecting personal effects for the family. I let him in. I didn't know any better. He was there maybe 40 minutes. He paused. But I'd already moved those papers. I found them the night Warren died, actually. I don't know why. Something told me to look. I put them in my apartment under my own bed. He had saved them without knowing why. He just knew. Took everything with me. The folder, the hard drive, the laptop. I thanked Harold. He walked me to my car and stood there in the parking lot while I sat behind the wheel for a minute, not driving, just breathing. Then I drove home and I sat at my kitchen table and I plugged in that hard drive. The password was Renee's birthday, reversed. I'd known her birthday for 51 years. I typed it in. What I found on that drive took me 4 days to go through. I'm not a forensic accountant. I had to look things up. I had to call Warren's college roommate, a man named Theodore, who's been in finance for 30 years, and describe what I was seeing without telling him everything, and ask him what it meant. Theodore was patient with me. He explained things carefully. What it meant was this. Curtis had moved approximately $340,000 out of client accounts over a period of 28 months. He'd run it through a series of accounts, a shell LLC, a personal investment account, finally into a joint account he held with someone who was not my daughter. A woman named, I wrote her name down. I won't say it here. It doesn't matter what her name was. What matters is that by the time Warren found it, Curtis owed something close to $200,000 to a private lending firm, the kind that doesn't appear in any bank directory, the kind that Warren had marked in his notes with one word, dangerous. The loan had a due date. I found the document. I read the date 3 times. Warren died on March 15th. The loan was due March 15th. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after I understood that. The refrigerator hummed. The neighbour's dog barked twice and went quiet. Outside it was raining. I thought about my son. I thought about him at 7 years old, sitting at this same table, doing multiplication tables. I thought about him at Warren's funeral, Curtis, the way he'd stood beside Renee, with his hand on the small of her back, steady and appropriate and grief-stricken, the way he'd shaken the pastor's hand, the way he'd thanked people for coming. I did not call the police, not yet. I want to be clear about why. I had papers, I had a hard drive. But what I had was a financial crime and a suspicious coincidence and a mother's certainty. And I knew from every true crime documentary I'd ever watched with my sister on Friday nights that certainty is not evidence. I needed more. And I needed to be careful because Curtis had already been in that apartment and had not found what Harold had saved for me, which meant he didn't know what I knew. I kept that advantage for 3 weeks. I did 3 things during those 3 weeks. First, I called Theodore back and told him everything. He was quiet on the phone for a long time. Then he said, "You need a securities attorney and you need to contact the SEC and you need to do it in the right order." He walked me through it. He gave me a name, a woman in Midtown who specialized in financial fraud. I'll call her my attorney. Second, I called a private investigator, a woman I found through my attorney. She confirmed within 10 days that the joint account Curtis held belonged to a woman he'd been seeing for 2 years. She also confirmed, through means I didn't ask about and she didn't explain, that the private lending firm had in fact made contact with Curtis on March 13th, 2 days before Warren died. Third, I did not tell Renee. That was the hardest thing I have ever done in my life, harder than the weeks after Warren's death. Harder than sitting in that apartment and reading his handwriting and understanding what it meant. Every time I sat across from my daughter at dinner, and I made sure to have dinner with her every week during those 3 weeks, made sure she wasn't alone. I carried that secret like a physical weight. She'd talk about work, about the garden she was trying to start in the backyard, about a trip she and Curtis were planning to Savannah in the spring. And I'd listen and nod and refill her glass of sweet tea and think, not yet, not yet. I need to protect her and I need to do it right. Curtis called me once during that time. "Checking in," he said, making sure I was okay. His voice was the same as always, warm, unhurried, the voice I'd trusted for 11 years. He asked if I needed anything, if the house was holding up, if I was sleeping. I told him I was doing fine, getting through it day by day. I told him I appreciated him calling. I hung up and stood in my hallway and pressed my back against the wall and breathed. The case I was building was almost complete. My attorney had been in contact with the SEC. They were interested, very interested, she told me, in what was on that hard drive. A formal investigation had been quietly opened. Warren's meticulous, careful, 3 years' worth of documentation was extraordinary, she said. Comprehensive, the kind of work that takes real dedication. He knew what he was doing, my son. He knew what he was walking into, and he did it anyway because he was trying to do the right thing. He was trying to give Curtis a chance to come clean, to protect Renee from the explosion that would happen when it all fell apart. He was too good, too careful with other people's feelings, even people who didn't deserve it. There came a Saturday morning in April when my attorney called and said they were ready to move. Law enforcement was involved now. Securities fraud at this scale involved more than the SEC, and there was additional evidence she hadn't shared with me in detail, but that related to what happened to Warren. She told me to be home. She told me not to contact Curtis or Renee that day. She told me she'd call me when it was done. I sat on my porch for most of that morning. It was one of those early April days in Atlanta when the azaleas are out and everything is pink and the air smells like cut grass, and it seems impossible that anything could be wrong anywhere. I drank coffee. I watched a pair of cardinals fight over the bird feeder. I thought about Warren. At 11:14 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Renee. Her voice was, I don't have a word for it. Fractured. Like something structural had given way and she was speaking from inside the collapse. She said his name. She said there were people at the house. She said Curtis had been. She couldn't finish the sentence. I'm coming, I said. I'm already coming. I was in my car before she hung up. I have been asked since then why I didn't tell Renee myself, why I let her find out that way, from strangers at the door, from the sudden catastrophic unravelling of her life on a Saturday morning in spring. I've asked myself that question too, many times. The truth is, there was no good way. There was no version where I sit across from my daughter and tell her that the man she slept beside for 11 years may have killed her brother, and she takes it calmly. And we make a plan together. That conversation doesn't exist. Whatever I did, she was going to be broken for a while. I chose to make sure the breaking happened, with a legal case already built, with evidence already preserved, with Curtis already unable to make her doubt herself by telling her I was wrong, I was grief mad, I was an old woman who didn't understand how money worked. I wanted her to have the truth delivered with proof, so she couldn't be talked out of it. She was sitting on the front steps when I pulled up. Her neighbour, a woman named Beverly I'd met once or twice, was beside her with a hand on her shoulder. Renee looked up when she saw me. She looked like she'd looked at 7 years old when she fell off her bicycle and couldn't understand why something hurt that much. I sat down beside her on the step. I put my arm around her. I didn't say anything at first. After a while she said, "Did you know?" I said yes. She pulled back and looked at me. I held her gaze. How 3 weeks? She was quiet. I watched her process it. The pain and I won't call it betrayal, what she felt toward me, because I understand it wasn't that, not really. It was just the vertigo of discovering that the people she loved most had been navigating a reality she wasn't part of. That's a particular kind of loneliness, even when it was done for you. I couldn't tell you, I said. If I had, it might have. I know, she said, not forgiving me yet, but acknowledging. I know, Mum. We sat on that step for a long time. Curtis was charged with securities fraud, wire fraud, and theft from client accounts. Federal charges. The SEC's investigation, combined with what law enforcement had gathered separately, was substantial. My attorney told me the case was strong. And then there was the other matter, Warren. I will not say what the investigation found. Not because I don't want to, I want it said plainly. I want it on the record. I want every person who ever thought Curtis was a good man to understand exactly what he was. But there are legal proceedings still ongoing, and I have been advised to be careful about what I say publicly until those are resolved. What I will say is this. The medical examiner's office agreed to take a second look, and the second look produced findings that the first look had not. Warren did not simply die. I think about Harold sometimes, an older man who happened to look at a desk, who happened to feel that something should be saved without knowing why, who made a phone call to a woman he'd never met and said quietly, carefully, "Don't bring your son-in-law." I think about the weight of a small act, the way one person's instinct, followed without understanding, can change everything. I've had people ask me what I would tell other women, mothers, sisters, anyone who has felt that nameless stone-in-the-chest certainty that something is wrong and been told, directly or indirectly, that they're just grieving, just overreacting, just a woman who doesn't understand how these things work. Here's what I would say. Write down what you know. Write down the dates, the inconsistencies, the things that don't add up. Keep it somewhere safe, not in your phone, not in a place where someone else has access. Find someone you trust who isn't inside the situation. Don't act alone and don't act fast. Take the time to build something that can't be dismantled. And if someone calls you who doesn't have to call, if a stranger reaches out because something told them to, pick up the phone. Renee is doing better now. It's been 8 months. She's not where she'll eventually be, but she's not where she was either. We have dinner most weeks. We talk about her brother more than we used to. Good things, old stories, the way he laughed. She's started seeing a therapist, which I'm grateful for. Some things are too heavy to carry alone, and knowing the difference is its own kind of wisdom. I still have Warren's track trophies on the shelf in his old room. I'm not ready to move them. Maybe I never will be. Some things you hold on to not because you can't let go, but because letting go was never the right word. They're just part of the house now, part of what the house means. I'm 67 years old, and I know things now that I didn't know a year ago, about the people you trust and the ones you shouldn't, about the long, quiet patience that justice sometimes requires, about what it costs to stay calm when every part of you wants to burn something down. My son built a case with his own hands because he wanted to do things right, because he believed that the truth, properly documented and carefully presented, would be enough. He was right. It just took longer than it should have. I carry that with me. I carry him with me. And on the days when that's heavy, I go out to the porch in the morning with my coffee and I watch the cardinals and I think, I did what I could with what I had. I did not let it go unanswered. That's the only thing a mother can do.